This one? Hello. Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me without the microphone?
No.
No. Okay. Hello, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy St. Patrick's Day. Everyone in Faha is asking for you. They want to know when you're coming home.
So you're going to begin with a reading of a couple of one scene, I think, and then we'll move into questions. And after I'm done with questions, there'll be time for all of you to ask a few questions before the book signing.
So, Time of the Child returns us to the County Clare village that this happiness was set in, called Faha. It's the Christmas of 1962, and a child is discovered there and brought to the doctor's surgery. And the doctor makes a decision on the moment he takes the child in his arms, which is to change his life, his daughter's life. And that decision is, don't tell anybody. And so the child becomes a secret inside that house in the days leading up to Christmas. So I'm going to try and read 2.5 pages here from a transformative moment in that household as the child and the presence of the child begins to exert itself on the life and mind and spirit of the people in the house. Like all household arrangements, theirs was made up as they went along. And like all such, escaped the judgment of right and wrong by the oldest alibi, family. But that morning, carrying the baby into the bathroom so she could do a right-handed face wash, the child on the natural shelf of her left hip, Ronnie realized at once that her father was not himself. She had it from an obvious clue. The toilet roll was on the holder. It was not on the floor alongside the toilet bowl where, from his seating position and not wanting to twist to take the sheet from the holder on the wall, the doctor customarily left it, and she customarily put it back. Briefly then, Ronnie had shared the dilemma of her father and wondered if she wasn't the one who had done it. But when she felt his shaving brush was still warm and saw that the basin had been left without the high-tide tracery of minute hairs he always left after he pulled out the plug, she had all the evidence she needed. When she arrived in the kitchen, the doctor was in his shirt sleeves at a table set for breakfast for two. He looked like he had lain all night on conundrums, but he rose when his daughter came in and examined the infant. She slept. She did. Ronnie said it with the imagined pride of a mother and flushed a little at the side of her throat in the knowledge that she was not one. Still, it came through her, and her father witnessed it and knew the plot was twisting into a knot he hadn't intended. It had only been a day and a half. He studied the baby's eyes. Already the erythromycin had begun to work on the infection. Getting better, isn't she? Ronnie asked. She will be fine. Really? Yes. Ronnie's exhale of relief was another signal impossible to ignore, and her father turned away towards the stove. You sit, I'll serve, he said. It came out more command than invitation, but had the virtue of novelty, and Ronnie did as she was told. Talking to the baby and telling her, we're going to sit and have our breakfast, so we are, aren't we? Yes, we are. The doctor passed her the warm bottle. The infant had no hesitation, and neither did Ronnie, the two of them closing a circle. Her father pulled up his sleeve garters to preserve the cuffs and cracked eggs into the pan. Neither what missed the edge and slid down the side, nor what fragments of shell got into the pan were any of his concern. His back to his daughter, he flicked fat onto the yolks with the silver spatula, seeing more clearly than ever that love could not be foreseen or contained, and all the while trying to keep the eggs from exploding. Here we are, he said, with small triumph. He slid an egg Ronnie hadn't asked for onto her plate. It was collared with a burnt frill, but the yolk was intact. From the wire toaster under the lid of the second hot plate of the aga, he brought 2 slices. "Will you hold her and I'll eat quickly?" Her face had a glowing. You could see it right there, something coming through her. Her forehead was different, he thought. She is more substantially herself, it occurred to him, and he was moved and resorted to the knitting of his brows and the uplift of his chin that he used to stave off any emotion that caught him unawares. The bottle finished, Ronnie had passed him the baby at the same time as the question, and the doctor took her at an arm's distance, the way he did all handed-off infant patients, angling back his upper body and making between his and the child's head the V of formal waltzers. He went down the kitchen with her like that, but soon enough must have read the clue in the stance, for to his daughter's amazement, without music or prompt, with the baby, Dr. Troy began to dance. At first it was just a sideways sway. First it was only a lean to the left and back and again, a flexion in the line of his trousers, an angle off the perpendicular so slight that if you walked in you would not have been able to tell, until you saw the sway back. Because now it was already something. It was a man dancing in a kitchen with a baby, a step and another, an over and back that repeated and made a pattern that declared its otherness from the ordinary by the fact that human beings move towards purpose. And this had none that was obvious, a sway and a step and another back, a linearity that was tentative until it was discovered introductory. For his eyes not leaving the baby's, this time when the doctor drew his shoe over, he drew the other one back too, and now was dancing a step, slide step in 3/4 time of such smoothness that the years fell off him, and the dawn kitchen might as well have been the Queen's Hotel, where Jack Handley and his show band hit the beat so true the dancers took the wax off the floor with them. With the baby, the doctor danced. A scene licensed by the infant's smile, which had the effect of dispelling breakfast decorum, letting the second egg spit and explode while man and child crossed the floor in a series of moving boxes, and a hum so low that it was made for an audience of 1, and could not be ascertained until the next time round. Said yes. Some beats behind the wireless, the doctor was singing Sinatra.
Thank you. So Dr. Troy was sort of a secondary character in This Is Happiness.
There are no secondary characters.
He was a character. He was in this.
He had a smaller part.
And so, how did you know, at what point did you know he would be, not the main character, since there are no main characters, but how did you know that you were going to write another novel with him in it? As a general rule, I never know anything. And I know that I never know anything, and I write by instinct, going into the dark, and supposing that the story is out there and that I have to go toward it. So all I ever have is a sentence, and I've described it as the tip of an invisible coat. And each day I tease that sentence a little more. I don't yank it, I don't force it, I just see what is that sentence saying. And then what is the next sentence saying? So the doctor only emerged as I'm writing the first scene in the church, and I saw him sit down and take off his hat and put his hat beside him. And something of that positioning of his hat beside him in the church indicated the slight separation of a doctor from the congregation. That is the separation that all doctors have. So the church in Faha is absolutely packed tight. It's 1962. Everyone is going to Mass. And everyone is crowding in where there are not enough spaces, and they just keep pushing in along the pew. So there's maybe 8 people already in the pew, and then a 9th person comes along, and they don't even look at the 8, they just genuflect beside them and push in. And the next, maybe a 10th person will come in and do the same, and they'll just keep going in. But in Dr. Troy, nobody pushes him in. There's that space that is preserved beside him by his hat, and that gives him that distance. And it occurred to me 2 things, that a country doctor
everyone is his patient, so he knows the secrets of everyone. He can't share them with anybody. And what would it be like if the doctor had a secret? And then the other reason, I can only tell in hindsight why I chose the doctor, but so in hindsight I realised that there was that extraordinary moment that occurred, I think unique in human history, when at the start of the pandemic, long before the vaccine was created, what we were seeing in Ireland were the field hospitals being set up in Italy as the virus had come in through Italy and was coming up. And the medical people were on the front line in serious peril. And we were all asked to, at a certain hour, to come out and bang pots, clap and applaud healthcare workers. And so that certainly entered me as a sort of, I never really thought, really, actually, how crucial healthcare workers were. And in a small parish then in Faha, that's why the doctor, I think, emerged.
So I want to back up here. You did not plot this out and outline it and know what you were writing or have a feel of what the story was. You just wrote a sentence and then saw what the next sentence was that followed?
Yeah, I've always done it that way. There's no fun if you know what's happening.
But there might be less anxiety.
So it's an act of fate, really. You believe that you will get there. There's a moment somewhere 2/3 of the way through this novel where the doctor, there's a line where it's described as the doctor wondering how is this going to end. All readers, at the same as they approach the narrow part of a book, wonders how this is going to end. Well, that's me too. I'm also wondering, I have no idea how it's going to end. So for me, since I started writing fiction at all, when I wrote the first sentence of 4 Letters of Love, which is, when I was 12 years old, God spoke to my father for the first time. And I knew that that was the first sentence, but I had no idea what the second sentence was, or where the story was, or what it was about. And I've written about and spoken about the fact that maybe 6 to 7 weeks, that's all I wrote. I just each day from a fresh page wrote that sentence. And that spent 2 hours and nothing else. And then my children would say, how'd the writing go today, Danny? And I'd say, well, tricky enough. And it wasn't until I got the second sentence that it opened the whole book up. So it goes, when I was 12 years old, God spoke to my father for the first time. God didn't say much. And that actual moment unlocked the whole book, because it's, and also my truest expression of artistic endeavor. And that is moments when you have illumination and you feel inspired and you feel this is good, and then it's not. It's just not. And then it's good, and then it's not. And that kind of leap forward, fall back action is actually my experience always. So I'm always writing with doubt. Is it any good? I have no idea. It was good yesterday. It's not so good today, but I'm going to stick with it, believing that if I stay with it and stay with it and stay with it, it'll be okay.
I have so many questions. First, I want to ask about 4 Letters of Love. That was your first novel, right?
Yes.
And that was published, I think, in 1997.
Correct.
And now it has been made into a movie.
Yes.
So, how did that happen? And was the movie kind of going to happen all this time, or did someone just find this novel and say, "Whoa, this needs to be made into a movie," even though it's 20 years old? Was this just a great surprise?
No. So almost from the moment 4 Letters was published, somebody in the 27 years since then, somebody was always making the movie. So maybe there are 6 directors, 6 different casts, 6 producers over those years, making completely different versions of the same movie. So they would be making the movie for 3 years, lose some of the money, the thing would fall apart, the cast would get too old. People who are now in their 40s were once cast as a 17-year-old. So that's how it was. So we began to believe, well, so we have lots of friends who would, at the end of a dinner, say, "Any news on the movie?" And for 20 years, yeah, the movie's happening. When will we get to see it? I just don't know. But Polly Steele, eventually, English director, came to our house in Kiltumper and said that she would make it, but only if I wrote the screenplay. So I wrote the screenplay, and we began a 6-year process that I also thought would collapse at the last minute. Every kind of thing can knock a movie sideways, especially a small independent film like this. But finally, 2 years ago, in February, March of 2 years ago. The film was shot in Donegal, on the beaches of Donegal, and in Belfast. And the Wednesday, 3 weeks ago, Christine and I attended the first screening of it at the Dublin International Film Festival. So it will, it will have a general release in America in July, I think, June and July in UK and America. And so it stars Pierce Brosnan as the father painter, Gabriel Byrne and Helena Bonham Carter as the married couple on the island, and has 4 wonderful, wonderful, wonderful young Irish actors, which I'm very proud of in it. So it has the 2 kind of different tiers of Irish talent in it, and it's good. So we sat in it, and really mostly we invited all those people who had asked us at one time or another any news of the film. We said, come, and so they did come. So about 30 people we knew in the audience, and really more than anything else, it was just a sense of completion. It doesn't matter if you like the film or don't like the film, really. Some will like it, some don't like it. That's life. But to just feel that it was sort of completed in a way was important. And so now I'm writing a screenplay of This Is Happiness, and hoping that we'll all still be alive by the time we get the screen. Who knows?
Okay, so it was not a glorious surprise.
No.
It was more of a slog. But I'm glad that I'm glad it's going to be shown here too. I've been trying to find that out because I would like to see it. But I would be happy to go to Ireland and see it too. So
Okay.
there's also that. Can you talk a little bit about, you were born in Dublin,
Yes.
and you and Christine lived in New York for a while, and then moved to a
Kiltunga.
cottage with nothing, right? No water, no electricity in West Clare, right? So what was that like? And did you ever think this was a huge mistake? We're cold, we're thirsty.
So I met Chris in Dublin, and in 1980 I was doing a master's degree in American literature, and she had come from America to do a master's degree in Irish literature. So we both had some expertise in each other's area, and could say some things about that. And after that, like many Irish people in the early 80s, you want to get out of Ireland. It was a depressed place, and I was young and wanted to go elsewhere in the world. And I had been studying American literature for years, so I was happy to come to America. So we came to America, and we lived here. We lived in New York, in Westchester County, so an hour out of Manhattan. And we lived there for about 4 years. Eventually, I was working as a copywriter for Avon Books in Manhattan, and Chris was working as a copy editor for the American Journal of Medicine. So both of us were on the commuter train in the morning in the dark and coming back in the dark. And we both had a sense of restlessness and a sense of lack of ownership of our own lives. And I particularly had a sense that I was some way betraying any talent that I might have had, because I would never get to answer the question, do you have any talent? Because the answer would always be, well, I never had time. I was too busy. I had to work. And the pressures of money in America and the pressures of you're living your life for work were such that I was going to escape answering that question. And so, fortunately, and more than fortunately, in a kind of magic, really, Chris had the same sort of dissatisfaction with life there. And then Chris, who is, as she will tell you, the more adventurous of the two of us, she is the one who comes up with the big ideas. And so she said, why don't we just move for a year to County Clare? So her father, the house that her grandfather had left in 1908 to come to America, 4-room cottage, farmhouse, classic traditional Irish farmhouse, was vacant. And she convinced her father to buy it, and that we would go and fix it up for his retirement eventually. And he must have known in hindsight that I had never handled a hammer and was not a fixer-upper of any kind, but he said okay. And so we did move there on April 1st, 1985, and it was 4 rooms, 4 single light bulbs hanging, and we got the water connected from the well. There's a well in the field next to us, and water pumped into the house from that. So it was very rudimentary, and we had mostly books. That was our wealth. We brought 10 boxes of books with us, and that's how we lived there. And it was poor and hard and difficult, and we then realized that also it was an extraordinary culture shock, because it was immensely dark and quiet. There were 6 to 8 houses there that were occupied at the time. They were all occupied by people in their 60s, and which we thought at the time was old. I was 26. And that we would spend the evenings going to those people and going on what they call in Ireland the coord, going around and just going in the back door and coming in for tea and biscuits or cake or currant cake or things like that, fruit loaf, and hearing the stories from the people there. And it was one of the most formative educations that I could have, because I had to have enormous respect for these people that had endured and lived here and carried on and, you know, carried such stories and wealth and simplicity, that it was very moving and powerful. And we wrote the first 4 books together about that.
I did want to ask, how did you go from writing memoir with another person to writing novels alone? Was that a difficult transition, or were you working on novels sort of with your left hand at the same time?
No, in those early years in Kiltumper, life was too urgent, and you know, potatoes had to be put in. Weeds, brambles that grow magnificently in Ireland had to be slashed back all the time, and nettles coming up everywhere, and turf had to be cut and saved and brought home, and it was too many things of actual physical life just to say, okay, we've now gotten ready for the winter, and now we're getting through the winter. And so I wasn't writing fiction, only writing non-fiction, but trying in a way to use the non-fiction with Chris as a sort of Chris describes it like where people go to business school. So we went to sort of writing school in our own house, where we learned how to describe what happened each day as truthfully and as cleanly and clearly as possible. For me, the most important thing in any writing is to be able to see the thing, so the reader can see what you're talking about, and that requires quite intense clarity and focus as you look at things and people and landscape. And so that's what we learned to do in those 4 years. And it wasn't until the 4th book, so 4 books over 10 years, that I felt I'm ready to start a novel. But I always wanted to write a novel. I always intended to write a novel. I just didn't know what that was until I got that first sentence.
So, This Is Happiness is set in 1958, and then the new book is 1962. So clearly, you were just a baby in 1958, and
I was noticing everything.
you were noticing everything in Dublin.
Yeah.
So, how can you write so intimately about a time when you were barely born and a place where you weren't? It's the scenes that you sat are so vivid and so real, and the people and the pace of the town and all of that, but you weren't there. So did this require a lot of research, or what?
More or what, I think. So I'm not really a researcher. I'm not a researcher. I have fun when I'm writing fiction, and research sort of, it doesn't seem that to me so much. So I think a few things. I think, first of all, I was paying attention to the older people when we first came in, because anyone who has taken a jump into a foreign country, everything is, you're sensitively aware to everything, you're noticing everything because you're out of your own environment. And so those years, those first 4 or 5 years there particularly, I was absorbing everything, sensually, emotionally, everything. And so it may surprise you, I don't know. In 1985, when the people that we were talking about, one of those people was able to tell me that he was the one in his family allowed to turn on the electricity when it came. That he came home from school and there was a pip on the wall, and he was allowed to flick the pip and turn on the light. And he remembers that in his living memory. So it wasn't that long ago for those people. They had those memories of that. And then the other thing is, those people in 1985 had been living the same way for a long time. Very, very little had changed on the surface of their lives, day to day. So it's not that much of a leap to go from the 1960s to the 1980s in Ireland, because the big factors, the big engines of change, like the internet and things like that, hadn't happened yet. So they were still living very, very similar. There were still fairs, for example, the fair that's in the time of the child. When we first arrived in Kilmhill Village, nobody told us about the fairs. You drive down into Kilmhill Village one day and it's full of cattle on the street. Just, oh, did you not know the fair was on today? And it's like the whole place is just full of cattle and traders and buyers and children and dogs and everything. And that's exactly because, the days of the fair are in the calendar, and we know that those are the fair days, the school is closed and all the rest of it. So I think that, first of all, the older people, I was getting a sense from them, then it wasn't that different. And then lastly, I think it's the role of a fiction writer to put yourself in the shoes of other people. So the skill has to be some kind of, or the craft is something to do with imaginative empathy, and being able to empathize and imagine what would it be like to be that person at that time. That's it.
So do the locals think you're eavesdropping on them and putting them in your books?
No. Fortunately, I can cleanly say that no person is in any of my novels who would be able to identify themselves or say it's me. So I'm not a pen and ink artist. I'm not a portraitist. I make up the characters. So no character, you will not find Dr. Troy if you come into my village or a nearby village. You won't say, oh, I found Dr. Troy. You won't be able to. I make up the characters physical detail by physical detail. This mouth, these ears, this hair, this way of standing, this way of speaking, all of that. And as I'm doing it and they're embodying in the language, they're coming towards me, I feel they're coming towards me, and I'm just paying attention to what's appearing on the page. So no character is based upon a real person.
And no character is based on you. And I'm asking for a specific reason, because I think it's in This Is Happiness, somebody calls Noel Niall. And I thought, a clue. No?
No, I'm sorry. I'm them all. I'm all of the characters, obviously, because I have felt all their feelings. And I find them all equally compelling and interesting. And the older I've gotten, the more I felt that the fascination of human beings, and the depth and the sort of valor of human beings, and the elements of pride, the elements that how people carry themselves, the dignity, just the dignity of people is just extraordinary. Not just in the west of Ireland, or not just in Fab, but just actual dignity of human beings who are all the time dealing with grief and anxiety and suffering and all these kind of things. And the more aware I am of that, the more I want to embody that in characters. And I also, as I say in the workshop, Julian's here somewhere, the wonderful thing about human beings for a fiction writer is that everybody thinks they're normal. And that's so fantastic, because nobody is actually normal. And so for a fiction writer, that's such a wealth. You are such a wealth of quirkiness, oddity, and interest, that for a fiction writer, it's just a joy to make characters out of you.
I'm normal. When I read Four Letters of Love, I read This Is Happiness, and of course I read Time of the Child, and it seemed to me that two of your themes in all of these books are love and miracles. And I'm interested in the miracles and why they interest you.
I think it's more faith than miracles. Is, I think, a thing that has preoccupied me throughout my life. Faith and doubt, and faith and doubt, and faith and doubt, in that kind of rhythm that I described in Four Letters. But I think wonder and is important and is preserved in me. And as I've gotten older, maybe some airs of cynicism or irony or whatever have washed away, and I consider them valueless compared to preserving some sense of wonder. So I think miracle sounds scary to me because of the holy aspect of it, and that I think that is outside of that. Whereas actually the existence of human beings every day and our interaction and the fact that love exists is kind of miraculous in a way. And that a person, so in this novel, for example, for me, the miracle is a very secular one inside this household, where a man, the doctor, who has lost his faith in humanity and his heart is worn out, he feels, and how can you keep on feeling and loving and keep feeling and loving and being hurt and feeling and loving and being hurt? How can you just keep doing that? And maybe the heart has a capacity and he had reached it and would be happy to die. But he can't die until he knows that his daughter's happy. And so that's what drives him into the actions that he takes. And so the miracle occurs like in this moment here where we have the doctor dancing with the baby, and he sort of, through the baby, as he breathes something into the baby, something is breathed back into him. Because at first we think the baby's dead and he breathes into the baby, and something actually comes back into him. And that actually for me is the traffic that happens between human souls. That's the traffic between each of us all the time. Something you do give something to me, and I give something to you. And in that difficult, invisible, transitory traffic is my interest in the idea of miracle.
I'll ask one last question and then open it up to all of you for questions. You have more, I can't say planned because you don't plan the books, but it is your intention to write, it is your hope to write more books set in Fahad. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so my general sense is, so again to say that I love writing. Chris has to say it's the thing I love doing the most. It's not what I love the most, it's what I love doing the most. I love Chris the most. So sometime when writing, this is happiness, something happened to me that hadn't happened before in any of the previous novels. And that is, I didn't want to end. I just wanted the book to keep going. I was so happy there. I love these people and they were just so interesting, and I just was happy just carrying on there. So I would liken it to one of those roads in the west of Ireland where you get on and you've forgotten where it is you're trying to get to because actually you give up, the map has gone wrong and you're just wandering around. And actually it's okay because you're in that light, in that landscape and that place, and something of that has imbued itself into you, and it's okay, you didn't have to get to the end. So that was my sense and feeling. And the other way I've likened it to is if anyone's been to a traditional Irish music session in the West of Ireland pub in the evening, and it started without a clock. Nobody, it didn't start at 9 o'clock, though it said on the outside window it's going to start at 9. Nobody was there at 9. And then it started, and nobody knows when it's going to end. It's just kind of going on until it actually comes to a sort of natural end. And I'm trying to achieve some sense of that in this happiness, that it goes on like the Junior Crehan, who was a real person and a real traditional musician. It's just trying to capture some sense of how that is in Ireland, which is outside of regular time. And so I didn't want it to finish, I didn't want to end, and so by the time I did end it and I knew the story came to its natural conclusion once Christy leaves, I knew that I was going back to Faha. And in fact I knew more than that I would not go anywhere else for the rest of my writing life. And so my intention is to write a series of novels for as long as I can, set in Faha, covering the time between the coming of electricity and the coming of the internet. So the second half of the 20th century, and to trace what happens to community, to church, to family, taking a minor character in one novel and bringing them forward in another novel, a character you might have thought didn't have much story in him, and say, oh my God, he does have quite a lot of story. That sense, in that way, celebrate the ordinariness and the heroic magnificence of what we call ordinary people. And so that's my intention. So the next novel in the series, and it's not a trilogy because if I say it's a trilogy, I feel I might finish it and then just die. So I said it's ongoing and it will never have an end number until after your obituary is written. I said, well, the number was this many. So I think, the next novel, all I know is that it's 1968, and I know that it will feature Jude, and I know a couple of other little things I'm interested in then, but I don't have the first sentence. So I will hope when I get back from this trip with Chris, to sit down and wait and see if there's a first sentence. The last thing to say probably is that, so it's not mysterious, but I write from the inside out, the experience I've said, so I don't know. And the first sentence is like you're going along a glass wall, and I know the novel is there. I know it's all out there, but I have to find the sentence that lets me in. And then once I'm in, I'm happy, 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 and the sentences flow. I write out loud, I say each sentence out loud, and I'm writing it to tell it to myself. I am my own first listener, and I feel I'm in I want to be in some kind of Irish oral storytelling tradition, and that the telling of the story is part of the action of the story. In other words, the languages and the rhythm and the cadence are as important as what happens. It's that you're trying to create a spell in which the reader can come inside the story. One of the nicest things, last thing I'll say, is somebody said to me, is that there are some books you live with, and you read 5 pages or 6 pages each day and that, but with This Is Happiness, they felt they were living in it. and that they knew these people and knew this place, and they were in it, and it became part of them. And when that happens, you know the spell is working. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here.
When you repeat the questions into the mic, and feel free to call in whoever, but when you get a question, speak up so we can all hear you, but Laurie will also repeat the question into the mic. I can hear.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about Faha. Is it based on where you were living? It's a fictional town, village.
Yes.
And I felt the description of Faha is real, so I actually was looking it up. And okay, I think there may be a Faha in Ireland, but that's not what you were writing about. So is that like another character that you created, and how did you do that?
Could you hear that? She's asking about Faha and where it came from and how real it is to her.
Yeah, so Faha is a fictional place. There are 6 to 8 Fahas listed in the topography of Ireland. None of them are this Faha, none of them are located where this is. So the first mention of Faha is in History of the Rain, the book that preceded This Is Happiness. In that novel, Ruth Swain is narrating it from her attic bedroom in a house that's more or less identical to our house, but that house is in Faha Parish. And at that time I had to locate the parish somewhere, so I located it for reasons of the story itself on the Shannon Estuary. So it's down in the Shannon Estuary, and the reason it needed to be on the Shannon Estuary was because in that novel Ruth's father, the poet, has died, and he's left her, like my father left me, his books, and she's reading his books to try to find him, believing that in the books that you choose to read in your lifetime and that you keep and not the ones you give away, but something of you remains in the books. And so she's trying to re-find her father, and also that idea of where do we go after we die? Is your spirit